I put together an entire presentation around telling the story of hunter-gatherer cultures. But then, as I was, finalizing my sources and putting the citations together, I saw that happened to come across this other robust kind of research analysis that showed that many of these researches, many of them were like ethnographic or whatever from the 60s, are incorrect, or at least heavily biased, which is most likely incorrect. And so, because of that, I had to scrap most of my presentation because I didn't feel good about presenting things that may not be accurate, or may continue this misinformation. And so instead, for this talk, I'm going to be going over a huge number of just ideas that were my original inspiration for this talk. And you'll see what I mean shortly. But essentially, it's just everything around the idea of design being more than just a craft. It being more than just putting pretty screens together. As you've heard from all of our past speakers, you really have to take into consideration the context. Whether that is the hardware of how what glasses can fit in the hardware, or if it's the different software going into that hardware and how that changes things, how that changes the experiences you have, whether that's collaboration, how can you bring people into your experience, what is your environment when you're in these virtual experiences, and how can you work on things together. And then your bureaucracy, the politics, how does all of that play into the limitations of your research and the things that you're trying to figure out. So all of these past speakers who were way more experienced than me in design and life in general. And so my kind of role as a junior, as a beginner person, is really just ask questions, right? To see, maybe dumb questions, but questions nonetheless, to see why do we do the things that we do? Why do we design the way that we design? Why is our society the way it is? Why is our technology the way it is? And these are some of the questions that I hope to bring in today's talk. All right. So I'd like to start with the fact that I'm not alone in this. Pretty much all of the past speakers and my mentors and everything like that says the same thing, that in order to be a good designer, you have to have a good understanding of everything else, of a lot of other things besides just design. That could be the political ramifications of, or rather, the political environment of your organization, or the political environment of the country, or the state, or whatever that you're in. In fact, Don Norman, who recently had an entire talk about the future design education, throughout most of that talk, he didn't really talk much about design education. He talked about the importance of politics, right? The importance of realizing the role of indigenous societies. He talked about institutional racism. He talked about all these other factors of environmentalism, social justice, economics, psychology, right? In fact, Don Norman himself is one of the leading psychologists. He's more of a, I think he said he started from electrical engineering and then went into psychology. And then from there, got into design. So once you start, seeing this trend, you start to realize, okay, yeah, you can't be a designer if all you're going to do is just, um, push pixels. Sure, that is important to understand the gestalt principles of design, but you have to have this bigger understanding. Alan Cooper says we need to be good ancestors. So he's, once again, one of these great designers from the 90s. Made a number of really great books. You could look it up yourself, but his idea of good ancestors really resonates with me. It's twofold. He says, number one, you have to really respect indigenous cultures, right? Because there's in a lot of these indigenous cultures, they have persisted with their way of life for longer than our entire civilization, our modern day civilization, right? They've existed for not just thousands of years, but in some cases, hundreds of thousands of years, right? The Kalahari, the various San and Khoisan people in the Kalahari Desert, their society existed for 150,000 years. And we can actually trace back, their migrations from the cradle of humanity 200,000 years ago in Eastern Africa to where they are today. And so he points out how you have to really look at what they did and why they do it and why it was so sustainable, why it was so adaptable, why it was so powerful. And then on the other side of being a good ancestor, he points out that you have to make sure that you're not borrowing from the future. You're not taking from the future, because we are going to be the ancestors of our descendants, right? Our kids, our grandkids, their grandkids, and so on. Their life, their environment, their reality is going to reflect our decisions today. And we see that with, how our society is largely based on where they, our ancestors were 100 years ago, 200, 400, 1,000 years ago, right? And much of our technology, much of our problems, right? Climate change, pollution, um, racism, a lot of these ideas and problems comes from the choices that our ancestors made. And so the reason why I'm bringing up all these different topics when we're supposed to be talking about XR is because, like I said, with these great folks, you have to take into consideration these larger ideas, this greater context, because that will determine whether or not what we develop today, what we design with our XR devices and experiences are actually going to be beneficial, or if they're just another short-term shiny thing. So I was trying to figure out a number of different ways to start this talk. Um, Before I do, let me go ahead and put a timer on myself, because I do want to make sure I am have enough time for the panel at the end, and I can go all day when I start to get talking about everything else. But essentially, when we look at how our reality is made, this gives us a great idea, a great amount of context into how we can begin to make new realities, right? We claim that we're augmenting reality, creating virtual realities, mixing reality, whatever that means, right? But we don't actually know a whole lot about how our current reality even functions. Here's a couple examples. In the beginning, there was the Big Bang. That's the current theory of how our universe started, with this Big Bang, where it was some singularity, something that is hardly really that we hardly can comprehend, of this infinite space of nothingness and everythingness that's all in one, and something happened, some virtual particles or something happened, and then boom, it exploded, and then our universe started to expand very quickly and all this other stuff. But we don't actually know if it's the Big Bang. We know something happened. It could be a Big Bang, it could be a big crunch, it could be a big bounce, signifying, that it's the start or the end of an old universe and the start of a new one. But we don't actually know which one of these happened and exactly how it happened. And the reason that's important is because as we're trying to create, these virtual realities, people are actually trying to simulate the universe. But if we don't even know, how our universe started, how are we going to simulate this new one? That means that our whatever universe we simulate is going to be based on faulty principles. Is going to be fundamentally missing a huge part of the story. And this idea is what really drives me to delve into all these topics. Because if we're missing the fundamental ideas of how our reality works, then I just don't think we can develop or design good holistic experiences. Here's a perfect example of what we do today. In the game Richie's Plank Experience, you go on the top of a building, you get in the elevator, go on the top of a building, and you have to walk off a plank. All right. This experience is extremely visceral for a lot of people. But there's another experience called Sweet Escape. This is a fun game, mostly oriented towards kids, but it's a family game where you are kind of basically mountain climbing, but through Oreos and lollipops and things like that. So both of these experiences deal with the idea of heights, the idea of going through very high places and trying to conquer that fear of heights that you have. However, I've helped hundreds, if not thousands of people through these experiences. And through that, I discovered that the same people who would refuse to walk the plank in Richie's Plank Experience would swing through Sweet Escape, even though Sweet Escape has you higher in the air. And the only thing below you is like some chocolate lava, right? So both these experiences get at the same feeling of being high in the air, but only Richie's Plank Experience really, instills that fear in you of, oh, I'm going to fall. If I fall, I might die. Even though people know this is not real, they put on the headset. They know that they're not in an elevator high in a building, but in Richie's Plank Experience, there's so much of the context that brings you into that feeling of you, pushing a button, of you walking into the elevator, of the elevator going up, and you seeing in the crack of the door the change in height. And then once you get out there, huge rush of wind comes in. Even though you don't feel it, you just hear the sound go through your headphones, and you see a helicopter, you see birds in the distance. So all of this, it's not just the graphics. It's the overall experience that makes you feel like you've been transported somewhere else. So once again, if we don't understand the fundamental aspects of what makes an experience real, then how can we develop holistic experiences? In the book Sapiens by Yuval, I forgot his last name, sorry. He points out how stories really sped up humanity's evolution. Before our evolution is pretty much all biological based, right? But when we invented fire and language and culture, which were the original extended realities, right? Because before we were just in a dark world, quote unquote, and we had very little ability, just like any other animal, to communicate with other things. But when we created stories, when we created language, we were able to live in realities. We were able to perceive of realities that did not exist around us. So that means that you can come up with some idea, you can come up with some vision and share it with somebody else, and they can live in your reality, at least a little bit, right? And if you believe that idea, if that idea was strong enough, you would change your behaviors. You would change how you move through the world, maybe even what you ate, where you lived, who you interacted with. And that supercharged our evolution so that we were able to, keep changing and adapting way faster than what was biologically possible. So that means to me, these stories are a fundamentally and incredibly important part of what makes us human. And yet today, we don't really talk about the role of those stories in our life. Yeah, you hear a little bit about, religion versus science and things like that, or misinformation versus facts and things like that. Really, what you hear is this idea that we are logical, that we are objective creatures, that we're trying to be rational, logical creatures. But In reality, we're an animal, just like any other animal out there. The main difference is that we respond not just to our physical environment, but our metaphorical environment, the environment of our ideas in our minds, our consciousness. We don't know what that is. Again, it's another thing. We have no idea what that is. We can't even explain exactly what consciousness is. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but we respond to our environment just like any other animal. But unlike other animals, we can delude ourselves into a emotional or metaphysical or spiritual or just an idea about how we should live our lives. And so that greatly changes how we can move around the world, how we can do anything. And so if our stories today are deluding ourselves into thinking that we're objectively better, that we're rational creatures, that we're just trying to be logical, then what we're actually doing is ignoring most of our environment, ignoring most of our environmental factors that plays into how we create our world. During the last talk, Edward pointed out the ecological aspects, right? And that's exactly what I'm getting to here. Today, if you look outside of your home or wherever you live, you have this idea that, we've conquered the environment, that we've created a home for ourselves that's above nature or whatever like that. But in reality, our language, the fact that we even have a word for nature, speaks to I want to say a large, a high number of delusion, right? Because it's not like we live in another dimension. It's not like we live in space yet. We are in an ecological environment. We are in nature. We just put it together in a different way. These are all the same Lego pieces. We just structured them differently. That does not mean we're no longer a part of nature, right? But we've deluded ourselves into thinking that we are. So if we're creating these XR experiences that says, oh yes, let me put on some glasses and I can see a whole new filter. What about the filter of our current reality? What about the filter of the fact that we live in caves and we call it structure? We live in boxes. We drive in boxes. We have these political boundaries. That's a box. We put ourselves in like basically a zoo. There's another book called Biophilia, and that one was a huge push into making zoos more humane. Because before, up to the early 90s, people would often put animals in little cages. But through that biophilic kind of push, they realized that that's very inhumane to put these things and put these animals in cages and expect them to live a good life. They realized that you have to give them an environment that's similar to their home habitat, their home ecology, in order for them to be the most successful and to enjoy life, to have a high level of fulfillment, to be healthy. And yet we have put ourselves in a zoo, and we're paying for that. We see higher levels of mental health issues, higher levels of loneliness, higher levels of even violence, not in our specific society, but on a global scale, where we go online and we just have this divisive interactions with people on Twitter or Reddit or anything like that, right? Maybe it's not physical violence, but the fact that we can't have a cohesive conversation with people who differ from us, that speaks to something that's not very healthy. So I wonder about all these things. I wonder, like, how did we get here, and why is it the way it is? So a large part of the research I was doing before was about these hunter-gatherer cultures. because it seemed like these hunter-gatherer cultures had a high levels of self-fulfillment, where before we had this idea of before cities and everything like that, people lived hard lives, they died of starvation, they average life expectancy of 25 or something like that. But a lot of the data was actually showing the opposite, that they had longer lifespans, that many societies actually lived similar lives to many of ours today, where they had elders in the going up to their 70s, and the highest rate of death was during childhood, doing for infant mortality and things like that. That's still bad, but it's not as intractable of a problem as we made it out to be. We told ourselves this story that our society today is categorically better than where it was before. But when you actually dive into the information, the anthropology and things like that, you actually see it's not so clear that we're so much better. And the reason why I had to scrap that information, though, is because a lot of anthropologists in the 60s had this idea of, excuse my language, but they called hunter gatherers the noble savage, right? And they had this idea where these primitive people had so much leisure time when they were, the original affluent society and things like that. And I tried my best to kind of go through this information to kind of bring some of that, to not include that in my presentation before. But it's extremely difficult to find really good research because a lot of it was ethnographic. It's not like they didn't research these people. It's not like they didn't go onto the lands and live with them for, a couple months to even up to 2 years. But a lot of those people turned out had an intrinsic bias of what a good society and a bad society is. They had intrinsic bias of what values to place on people, on different cultures. They had an what's the term? Ethnocentric view. And because of that, a lot of the research is corrupted. However, I was still able to find some information that shows that though their life may not have been perfect or the best that humanity has ever been, they definitely had a lot of things that we suffer from, or rather they did not suffer from things that we suffer from. So for instance, heart disease and cancer, right? They didn't have much of that. And it's very obvious that we have increased those levels from our lifestyle, our mass production and things like that. And in fact, they had a wide variety um, of nutrients, of foods. So you may have heard of the Paleo Diet. It's a very popular thing. But the problem with that is that today we simply don't have a good range of products of healthy organic food. And I don't mean organic as to say, oh, all GMOs are bad or anything like that. That's another conversation. But the fact is that a lot of our foods are corn based, right? A lot of our fruits and vegetables are still inherently monocultural, where we try to have this globalized sense of everybody grows these cash crops instead of having a super hyper localized thing where this vegetable or this fruit is available in this area, right? So when you do the research, what you do find is that there was a wide variety of these different hunter-gatherer cultures that ranged from the level of food production or the level of foraging, where the more food production they had, the more typically the more inequality they had, and the more disease they had, and the more large scale warfare they had. Now, again, it's not super clear, it's not one for one, but it does tend to be a trend. And some of that seems to be because when you have more density, when you have more humans in one area, you can have more production in that same area. But because you have more production, you have more to protect and you have a larger failure point. So we can actually track this pretty accurately with agriculture cultures where they're farming and just storing more food created a larger sense of scarcity. Because if something went wrong, right, with your harvest or your food stores that year, you're it's, you're gone. That's your food stores for the next season, maybe even the next year. And so you had more warfare because people realized that, hey, this other community has a whole bunch of food products that I can get, and you had more to protect. And so you had a development of warfare. You also had the development of inequality because of that. Because when certain people were able to hoard more of that food or store more food, they inherently had more power. They inherently could say, hey, check this out. I have more resources, and other people would have to come to them for those resources. Again, it's not super clear. This is a span of over thousands of years that it took place, but we do see a steady trend. And so for me, I wonder, is is scalability to large, numbers, is that overrated? So often we see, the idea of scaling a startup to reach 1 billion people, or scaling a game to reach, millions of people, hundreds of millions of people in the same world, or social media and things like that, get that viral coefficient and things like that. But oftentimes with those large corporations, with those large games, with those large apps and things like that, we see more and more problems. You see, especially with social media, you see, increased division because have all these people of different viewpoints crammed together in the same area, in the same structure. Call it an app, call it a community, call it a game. And so if people aren't thinking about the fact that people have very different tastes and different perspectives and different ideas, but they're going to cram them into the same area, then you're not going to design enough, you know, tools to moderate that, to increase that localization and decrease that sense of community. So these are just some of the many, many ideas I'm thinking about. Like, how do we bring this into the talking points? See somebody raise their hand here. I think Naz, feel free to put your question in the chat. Um, but yeah, I especially wanted to bring up that community aspect because we see metaverses being created. We see Epic creating a metaverse of, taking their success with Fortnite and trying to create this huge space where millions and billions of people can interact together. We see that going on with a number of, metaverse. For people that don't know, a metaverse is basically like Ready Player One, if you saw that movie, or Sword Art Online, where, okay, no problem, Nas, where you see this virtual world where a whole bunch of people can come together and work, play, and do anything in the same virtual world. And it's a really interesting idea. It's a really fun idea. But again, the problem comes from if we don't even understand how our current world works, if we don't understand how to have 300 million people in America be cohesive, how can we do that with, 500 million, with 1 billion people in a metaverse? We really have to consider what makes reality reality, whether that's physical reality, mental reality, or spiritual. That's another aspect that we don't talk about in today's, conversation of virtual reality and things like that, is the fact that spirituality is a huge part of humanity. Some of the first ideas were religious or ritualistic, where we came up, where a lot of anthropologists are tending to say, are estimating that are based on research, that a lot of the music that we create and a lot of the ideas that we have, a lot of myths that we have, comes from these spiritualistic rituals. And today we even see that even though many people may or may not be religious, you see this idea of rituals, right? For instance, the Oculus. When you put that Oculus on, you take it out the box, it makes a noise. It says boom, turns on. Put that on the headset, and it's just like you see, the Oculus space, and then it goes into this virtual world, this kind of grayscale area, and you see the environment around you. All of that is a ritual, and I call it that because the HTC Vive doesn't have that. All right, when you put in, you have to turn it on physically from the computer, and then you have to put it on your head. You have to grab the controllers. There's no, it's just in and out, right? And you can feel the difference in the experience. And I don't support Oculus. I do not support Facebook or anything like that. But they have a great idea. They have a great understanding of that ritualistic practice. That we call it hooks. We call it habit loops. But it's ritual. It's the idea that this is how you do things, and this is how you bring it. This is how you create an experience to bring you into the world, to get you immersed into what you're about to experience. So, running against my time here, so I'm going to end it with this to get back to the physical side of it. And Neil Stephenson's book, Fall or Dodge in Hell, one of his characters makes a great observation. He says, how do you simulate a reflection? To get into it, here we go. So he points out this thing called the hand with reflecting sphere problem. You can look this up. It was a self-portrait depicting the artist reflected in a mirrored sphere supported in his left hand. Esther's face, MC Esther, was in the middle, but a geometrically distorted rendering of his office could be seen around it. In the background of that was a window. This, of course, was gathering in light from at least 93 million miles away. The point being that in order to make a faithful 3D computer graphics rendering of an object as simple as a shiny ball, you would, in theory, have to take into account every object in the universe. And that observation, when I read that book a couple years ago, I was like, that's extremely interesting, because that's so true, right? We see that with this idea of photorealistic games and experiences, where something that was a top of the line graphics wise, 10 years ago looks like crap today. And it's so interesting that there's always going to be a push for more reality, for more fidelity. And it's important here that to note that it is like asymptotic. We will never get there. But the push for it, right? There goes my time. The push for it encourages us to keep learning, to keep growing, to keep realizing that there is always more things that we can include to make this experience more realistic, more holistic, more contextual, more inclusive. And it's that mindset that we have to have in order to keep making better products and to keep bringing in more people to truly make it accessible and inclusive and just an amazing experience. And it looks like Deetha has a great long comment here. I'm going to go and talk about this before I leave. But she says, or he, I don't know. I don't necessarily think that we need cohesiveness necessarily because of the value of different opinions and diversity, but I think the desire is to create a shared experience in the sense that people can productively communicate their diverse ideas. I guess going back to the idea of a visceral experience, what do you think are the visceral parts of a productive conversation that can be applied to design to make conversations more productive as we try scaling up communities? Yeah, definitely. A couple points on that. So the idea that of cohesion, I do think that is both overrated and underrated. Overrated because cohesion as a forced experience where everybody is kind of forced to go follow along the same traditions, to follow along the same culture, the same way of doing things. I don't think that's a good way of going about cohesion, even though that's how much of these websites and experiences are built today. It says, hey, this is how we do things. This is what logic is. This is what rationality is. This is what an experience is. But trying to assume or force that everybody to do this one thing does not create cohesion. We see that everywhere, right? People strike out. People try to break out of that and try to do their own things, or people just abandon the experience and go try something else. And what you were saying here afterwards about having diverse ideas, I think that is the key, is to have what I call a fractalization. I wanted to bring this up too. There's so many things I wanted to bring up, but since this is related, this is idea of entropy, right? And the second law of the second law of thermodynamics talks about entropy. But there's this idea, which is not really based on the science, that entropy is going from a state of disorder to order. And this idea is what people have when they think that we are agents of entropy, that we are, or anti-entropy, that we are creating more order in the world and the universe and things like that. But when you actually look into entropy, you see that it has nothing to do with order or disorder. It's actually like a cup of coffee, right? Where you have, at first it might be separated. It might have the milk on top and the coffee on bottom. But when you start mixing it, that creates more entropy. It's super chaotic. And everything is mixing together. You see this really beautiful, swirls and amazing, things going on, and you can't really understand, you can't really predict where everything is going to go. But at the state of max entropy, it's all one. It's all shaken. It's all stirred up, and there's nothing more you can do with the system, with the cup of coffee, and that's entropy. And that middle part, that swirls and all that chaos, that's life, right? So, and I bring that up because we see this in our societies where we try to make more order, but in actuality, we're just diluting ourselves from what we're doing with entropy. This micro I'm talking on, this desk I'm talking on, it doesn't push away entropy. It creates more entropy, because this desk has less opportunities than when it was a tree. A tree could do all sorts of things, but this desk is just a piece of wood that I put my desk on, right? Maybe you can break it down or whatever. And in our organizations, in our technology, we think that we're ordering things, that we're making things better if we put it all in one order. But in actuality, life happens when you allow that diversity, right? When you allow that chaos, when you allow everybody to do their own thing, and they just work together through emergence, through emergent properties, through just the natural cohesion of different things working together. So I think in order for us to have better conversations online, in order for us to have better metaverse experiences and things like that, we have to have this fractalization, this chaos, this natural breaking off of the large scale experience, and allowing for a whole bunch of these small experiences that can come together if they want to. They can come together, they can break apart as much as they want. So I'm not sure if I was making sense with that, but I hope you see what I'm saying there. But we're way over time, so I'm going to go ahead and bring my panelists on board, and we can continue having this conversation or any other. But thank you all so much for listening so far. There we go. All right, Alita and Ube, thank you once again very much for your speeches, your talks, your information. I really appreciate everything that you all are doing and have done. And yeah, let's go ahead and continue this conversation. Awesome. I'm glad you all enjoyed the answers in the chat. But yeah, so what are some of your ideas on XR? It could be in this, what I was just talking about in the context of reality in life and things like that, or in your own, experiences and expertise and things like that. What are some of your, I guess, insights that you really want people to take away about the idea of XR in design.
I liked your thought about trying to recreate these realities, but you can't unless you take into account every single thing, and you can't truly recreate it. Our brains make up for that, though, but our brains make up for it based on our perceptions of reality and our history and our how we grew up and what we see. So that is a good point, and that's something that people should think about when they're designing these experiences, is that any experience really, we're coming from our own backgrounds and we've all got our own perspective. So how can you create an experience that is going to get the reaction that you want without
Right.
a considerable amount of research? I guess I don't know how. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
I like how Pixar does a fantastic job of studying humanity and making a very effective story out of a very effective narrative. They spend tons of time studying, researching to really get to the heart of how people are. And I think that's something that's important for people creating experiences if they're wanting to create a good narrative within XR, is to follow suit and do something very similar to that.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot I can say to that, but Ube?
Yeah, I mean, contextualizing experience, to piggyback off of that. Yeah, and a lot has to, be a true evangelist within the field. And yeah, a lot of times you'll get resistance, sometimes you won't be the popular person in the crowd, but you really have to stay true to like really understanding human existence and really being proud and having that maturity behind accepting your personal identity along with the empathy of getting to know others, and it sounds easier said than done, but when you're in a room and everybody is kind of, putting off that resistance of getting to know the true dynamic of what makes people interact with a product, a service, or even the ability that people aren't ones and zeros and they're not sheep. And, like what Stuart said in the comments, like a lot of people don't want to follow the dotted line, and yeah, it's like trying to design for a lifestyle. There's so many different scenarios, and to provide too many options, you're basically going to get drop off. If you have only a few, is it enough?
Yeah. Right.
To provide that ability to, accept new market segmentation or really align with your current customer basis.
Yeah, I think there's 2 points I would bring to that is like what Aletha was saying. You can have. I mean, we can't really simulate all of reality yet, right? Who knows how long that will
Right.
take?
Yeah.
But we can begin to substitute for what we know we can't simulate for. But in order to do that, you have to, like you said, have that research, right? You have to understand what you're missing and what you have, what you can include. So one example of that is with Microsoft. The new HoloLens 2. They're coming up with these holograms where they have this like sphere. I mean, this cube, and because HoloLens is just the headset, right? It's no haptics for it. It's really disconcerting to like hold a hologram and have no feeling of it. And so what they did is tied the haptics to the sound and the lights. So whenever you touch it, wherever you touch it, that area turns color and it makes a sound. And so it begins to fool your brain to thinking that, oh, wow, this is real. I just interacted with something. It gives that feedback, right? See, that's every day in design. You need to have that feedback. And it's things like that that I think creates a good experience where you realize, okay, maybe I can't make this prop, have all the physics, but you can at least give it some level of feedback. You can at least give it some pushback so that when somebody does something with it, it feels like there's some consistency rather than just being a prop. So yeah.
Right. It's like the involvement of, people speaking on the Bluetooth speaker in their ear, making all these kind of grand gestures and haptics that don't have any connection with the actual headset, or you always have that friction point, like, are you talking to me or are you on something? So, there is that disassociation with this technology. And, when will people adopt where it's okay to do haptics in midair?
Yeah.
What if we have a new lens where, it's injected into our retina, and then you're having that physical kind of haptic, or maybe even a blink or what have you, but, same type of disassociated physical interaction. You don't want to be walking around swiping and nobody wants to talk to you when you're doing
yeah
but yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, and that's something that I really like concentrated on and focused on as like my younger self as an industrial designer, and now I'm like kind of occupying this absolute digital space. The haptics and bringing back that physical touch, or smell, or that disassociation with D2C. How do you have that try before you buy, that actual physical encounter?
Right. Exactly. What do you think, Aletha, in terms of the haptics I know you've done a number of those articles on, the haptics situation or walking, right? In VR and AR and things like that. So how do you think we can substitute for some of that?
Our brains adapt, like you were saying. They fill in the blanks when you've got those extra things like sound and light to react when you're touching something. Our brains will fill in that blank, just like it does when you draw a stick figure of a human and we see it as a human. Our brain is imaginative enough that it will fill in that blank.
Yeah.
They are, of course, working on technology that will allow haptics, actual haptics, through whatever means, air or volumetric projections or any of those things. That they're not there yet. They're still working on it. But yeah, there will always be a gap. I did recently a research project where a person was in VR and we were expecting them to like it, but they turned around and said, I don't like this at all. I can't feel anything. I can't touch anything.
Right.
So it was a complete separation for them, because some of us are, and it reminded me that we learn differently. Some people are visual and they can take a concept, and then there are some people who really need to actually physically touch something for it to connect. And that tactile feel isn't there right now.
Right.
And so it is a gap that, yeah, our brain fills in the blanks, but we all learn and think differently. So that's a generalization to say that our brains fill in the blank.
Yeah, that's great points. Just that gap is so important. And I think it's important really to not ignore the gap. I think that's what we see very often.
Mind the gap.
Like, yeah. Like what you were saying, Ube, about like, oh, it's okay. It's okay. Just, don't worry about it. No, we have to worry about it.
Hashtag ship it.
Right. Yeah. You can't just ship half baked. I mean, that gap could be somebody's entire reality. That gap could be in somebody's entire accessibility, their eyesight, their sense of touch, their ability to experience your experience, right? So that gap really matters. But goodness, I want to keep going, but we're basically almost done.
Are we at time?
With the time, yeah.
we could have one more topic, right?
All right. In that case, I would love to bring up this idea of abundance versus scarcity, right? And this is something I wanted to get into a little bit in my talk, but in today's time, we have this idea of both having an abundance of resources, an abundance of experiences of content, at the same time as a scarcity of resources in our daily lives. Like we don't have enough money, or we don't have enough time to, enjoy life, to do the work that we want to do. And so from each of your experiences, like how do we balance, that feeling of abundance with that feeling of scarcity? Should we balance it? Should we look for one or the other? Should we, how do we kind of think about that and this idea of XR?
Yeah, that's a that's a pretty jam-packed answer. And we're pretty much dabbling into like kind of list view choices, and like I just brought up, trying to design for lifestyle choices. And I always love striving for that because it's so complicated and it's so dynamic, and it's forever ending a moving target. And that's why I love it so much. And maybe this is why I love human interaction so much, because it's not predictable. And those that are predictable, I tend to keep walking. Like we don't share like an interest, or there's not, and it's not necessarily providing like commonality or those touch points, but it's just providing a story, a journey that makes you an individual. And how do we capture that in an experience where you have an abundance of choices? Is that a great experience when you're going through 18 different pages to, in order to create a custom experience? It kind of defeats the whole point of the company or your experience getting to know the consumer. When you have to put that much, when you expect that much work and effort on the consumer end,
Yeah. That's huge. The idea that putting in the work to well, let's not get into it, because I was going to go into a whole other topic, but Alita, you have
what is it?
thoughts
What
on
is
this?
it? We got like 10 minutes.
Right.
What do you got? Throw it out there.
No, it's just it reminds me of the idea of the infinite game, right? Of seeing life as a finite game versus an infinite game, where instead of like our current society, much of our current society is achievement based, of the idea that you reach this goal, then you keep going for more, then get to the top of the hill and you win, right? And we see that doesn't really work. That doesn't really make people happy or have that sense of fulfillment. And when we look at these hunter-gatherer cultures and many other really successful people who have a sense of fulfillment rather than just be driven by the need for more, is that they view life as more of an infinite game where you're in the present moment and you're trying to experience, what it is for what it is, not for some future gain or for some idea of, where you can be in some time in the future, but like where you are right now. That mindfulness aspect that we talk all the time about, but it's really a way of life of really getting into this experience of just appreciating the moment and realizing that everything that you do, you can still be motivated, you can still be ambitious, but that doesn't have to be driven by this fear or need for a material gain, right? It doesn't have to be winner takes all. It could be everybody wins. It doesn't have to be zero sum. It could be win-win, and that's kind of how I see that aspect.
I've been around a long time, and I've seen that. I used to live my life purely goal-based, like, okay, now I want to achieve this thing, but then once I achieve that thing, it's like, okay, now what? It's done. Now
right,
what?
exactly.
And what I've learned is that when I focus my effort on making a difference in somebody else's life, making a difference for the better for others.
Absolutely.
Way more fulfillment in my life than goal-based for myself. And so that ties back to the hunter-gatherer. They're living to support each other. They're living for their community to help each other. Everyone has a role to play in their community to help each other survive. And we've gotten away from that because we've become, in America, middle class at least, we've gotten away from that because we're so comfortable and we've forgotten what it's like. And it goes back to your scarcity topic. It's like right now I'm in a conundrum because I'm going through this all in my mind right now because I lost my job due to COVID twice. And so right now I don't have one, but I'm in the conundrum now. It's like I'm able to do more for others now than when I had a job because I'm writing all of these best practices. I'm here talking to you about these things. I'm helping future generation learn how to design better experiences, and I'm doing other things too. But it's like if I had a job, I wouldn't have the time or the energy to do this. It's like stupid jobs. I don't want one. I want to do this.
Yeah,
right.
It's incredibly difficult.
And so it's like it's hard to balance that. And so I'm in that conundrum right now trying to figure. So society expects, why don't you have a job? You just go get a job and do your goals, live your successful life. It's like you could do so much. And it's like, but that's not what I want to do. I want to do this.
Right.
Because that is way more fulfilling. And so I'm in that right now.
That's so incredibly awesome and relevant for I think every situation, something I've experienced so much. And I think to tie it all back to XR, right? Like that really, I think, should inform what type of experiences we do develop and we do, decide to support and invest in and participate in, because we could create metaverses, right, where people can do whatever they want to do, and we figure out how to, provide them some sense of support, either financially or communally or whatever, right? We can now figure out how to do that with metaverses, whether it's blockchain or some other AI or whatever, right? We can figure out how to do that. But if our stories for ourselves, if our ideas for ourselves is focused on how can I get mine and how can I achieve this goal, and right, instead of how can we create a community where all of us can achieve our goals and all of us can, help each other out and things like that, that's going to determine what experiences get made in the first place, what gets invested in, what gets designed and things like that. So I think that's really important idea to think about. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. And you better hold on to that when you become a manager, Elijah, seriously. But yeah, going back to like the instant gratification and everybody or many different demographics and classes enjoying this. And, you brought up the, the verticals of social media and whatnot, and how it just kind of pertains to this single lifestyle and not really enticing physical human interaction, and this is something that, yes, I have to pivot my business model towards, but it doesn't align with me personally, and this is kind of the catch-22, especially, I mean, if you work for another company, you're going to have your other gripes if you're running your own show, but it's just the fact of the matter that you're always going to be contested with, is this right for myself? Does it align with my values and the business values, and if you do have that maturity and that thick skin to really separate yourself from that, I commend you, but there are days where it just kind of hits you, you're like, I'm doing a great job. This is making the initiative. It's generating an ROI, but it's not benefiting human existence. It's taking advantage of a demographic,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then,
going to work
yeah,
for some companies versus others, it's like what they're doing is not good for humanity.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
But people keep saying you should go work for them. It's like, I don't want to.
Exactly, right.
Yeah, why not? I don't want to get political, but
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's a I guess we can go ahead and close it on that, because I think that's a great just idea to have. We have some comments here.
Yeah, what do we got?
Sharing your insights, living for the community indeed. But again, should we be invested in this legacy by helping them when they're not for helping people? Yeah, that's exactly my point. Like, or really, I think what everybody's saying is like,
Yeah, legacy companies. Yeah,
choosing
like ageism or innovating for the ages. That kind of legacy platform or legacy backend.
Yeah, like how we work and what we choose to work on, I think has more importance than people give it credit for. Like we think, oh, we just get in there, make our money, and get out. But when you're making that money, you're making it for them too. Yeah, for profit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
or making the stakeholders happy.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
Stockholders.
Yeah, and something that we didn't discuss before is that us making those decisions means other people's jobs, means organizational shifts. And there's been times where we've designed people out of their jobs, and not thinking about transformation of learning a new skill to be a part of the experience. You see it with automation, you see it with the robotics and AI and the natural language and whatnot. Like you see this kind of interaction between the actual IVR, the actual person, and the digital experience, and I worked on an initiative one time where people just felt like they were slight-handed because they didn't know what that transition was or when it happened. They're like, hey, I thought I was still talking to the automated robot, and it just kind of set this bad taste in their mouth of not having trust or not having the ability of the company looking out for the best interests of looking for help or seeking help, So I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah. Looks like our typist had to go.
Yeah, there you go. Some good responses there.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
It's just that
it's a real talk.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I could go more into AI too and how it's actually dangerous as well, going back to sci-fi interfaces, but it's already 201.
Absolutely. Yeah. I had to bite my tongue on my talk on that one. We'll save that for another.
I'm definitely going to figure out how to do one of these because had some great information and I really love hearing you all speak. So as always, thanks for sharing your information, your insights, and thank you
too.
so much for coming.
You did a great job. Great.
Thank you.
Applause for your first track. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you all for the comments as well. Bettina definitely had a lot of great comments here, and we have to go, but this doesn't have to be the end. You know how to reach us. This is a day and age of Google, so you can search any of us up and let us know what you think and get in contact and everything like that.
Yeah, so, I'm very responsive on LinkedIn, so if you want to chat, hop on a call, do a one-on-one, feel free to ping me.
Yeah, me too. And I've got a booth. I don't know if you do too, or eBay, but there's a booth. You can go check out some links on there too.
Yeah, awesome. So yes, thank you so much. This was a great talk, and everybody have a great day and keep being more awesome.
Thank you.
See y'all.
Hey, bye.
Bye.